first ever episode of the UIW SOM Med School Mindset podcast. My name is Tristan McCullum, and I'm a recruiter at the UIW School of Osteopathic Medicine. I'm also the creator and host of Med School Mindset. The current pre-med climate is such that students rely heavily on message boards, social media influencers, and pre-med gurus. The reality is that as an aspiring physician, there are very few resources that we can rely on for simple, accurate, and transparent information regarding preparation for medical school. This podcast is intended to bridge that gap between pre-medical students and our admissions office by sort of aligning our content with that of what you need most at the time you need it most throughout the application cycle, and right from the source, right here at UIW SOM. In our inaugural episode today, I want to welcome a super special guest, someone that UIW SOM applicants will definitely want to impress, the Dean of Admissions, Miss Andrea Sachersky. How are you doing today?
Oh my gosh, Jalen, the flattery. I'm doing fine. I'm really excited to be here and to get our podcast series going. I think this is a great way to be able to relay very important information to candidates. And like you said, there's a lot of misinformation out there, or information that's not always 100% accurate. So I think it's good that we're talking about this. And yeah, this is going to be fun.
It's going to be a great time. So in today's episode, we'll be discussing the topic that is likely burning in everyone's mind at this time of year, the application process. You know, as a recruiter, one question I get asked all the time is there a magic number? You know, are there any actual numerical values an applicant should be shooting for, striving for to be competitive? So for me, normally the answer is no. So I'm really curious as to what your perspective is on this.
Well, your answer is correct. There is no magic number. Boy, I wish if we had some type of a formula that we would be able to use that would make everyone's job so much easier, but we don't. The advice that I give candidates is to simply go to the website of the schools that they're interested in applying to and take a look at their class profiles. Most schools will publish GPAs as well as average MCATs. And if you're an applicant to that school, how do your metrics compare to the average student at that school?
Absolutely.
If it's very close or it's above those metrics, then obviously you'll be a competitive applicant. If it's not, I think you have to just do a thorough review of your application, what you could possibly do to improve it, or what is it that you would be the exception to what their profile would be. So I think that is more beneficial and better advice to give a candidate than just kind of quoting some numbers.
Absolutely. I think that numbers can sometimes be a little superficial, especially when you're trying to take on that truly holistic review to an application.
I can say that I think every medical school, though, will have specific criteria that's important to that particular school. Perhaps it's a unique curriculum and they want to look for candidates that they feel will be a good fit for that curriculum. They may have a research focus, or it could be just the overall mission of the school. And I think I mentioned this before, but it deserves further discussion. Mission fit is really important to the UIW SOM. We are community-based medical school, and so we look for candidates that have demonstrated service to their communities and want to improve the health of their communities. So again, a strong applicant will really understand and know the school they're applying to.
So once a candidate feels they've checked all the boxes for application to SOM, the next logical step is to apply, correct? Do you think you can walk our viewers a little bit through the application process?
Sure. First, let's start with the application itself. We use the ACOMAS application, and I think it's important to mention that UIW SOM is the only Texas medical school that does use the ACOMAS application.
Really?
Most DO programs in the country use the ACOMAS application. The exception are the two other DO schools in Texas. Our cycle opened for the 23-24 admission cycle year. It opened May 4th, and it's going to close March of next year. And so that's a pretty long admission cycle. And it really does allow candidates to apply at the point that they can present the strongest application. And we operate on rolling admissions, which means we admit qualified students during that cycle until our class is full.
So we're taking qualified apps all the way through the end of the year. That's
Yes.
really good to know.
Yes. Yes.
So what about the prerequisite courses required for that application?
Ooh, prerequisites.
I know.
I think many candidates think that is, once they just check those prereq boxes, they're ready to
It's
go.
done.
So let me start with the basics. What is required, which is the 8 hours of biology, the 8 hours of chemistry, the organic chemistry, 8 hours of physics, and UIW SOM requires 6 hours of English composition or literature. But it's important for candidates to help with the transition to medical school that they take some of those upper level science courses. And those, quite truthfully, are the very difficult courses. And so I know there's always a concern with maintaining a competitive GPA,
Hmm.
but it is human anatomy and physiology, biochemistry, genetics, microbiology, neuroscience,
That's a tough one.
yeah,
Definitely a tough class.
just the behavioral sciences, just again those courses that probably are a little bit more reflective of what they're going to face in medical school.
Hmm. So you want to see the difficulty increase throughout their undergraduate career.
Yes.
So obviously the natural segue for those prerequisites is to be able to apply them to your standardized test, which is our medical college admissions test,
Sure.
MCAT. You know, can we talk a little bit about the MCAT? Does an applicant need to have their MCAT score at the time of application? What kind of scores are we looking for?
My advice is that candidates present their application once they feel comfortable or satisfied with their MCAT score.
Hmm.
And so once we receive an application along with an MCAT, it's pushed to us. So um, we will start the process with that. My advice to those who might be reapplying or excuse me, not reapplying, but retesting is to wait a little bit later in the cycle until they get those new scores. And each school, like I said before, each medical school is really different about how they handle or process MCAT scores. So it is a good question to ask each individual school.
So, Andrea, overall, after we've received the application and all the required documentation, what can applicants expect as far as timeline? From review to notification of interview to maybe even notification of admission.
Sure. Jalen, that really does depend on the point that we're at in the admissions cycle. As I mentioned, it's a pretty lengthy cycle. That and the volume that we need to address and review. This year, it took a little bit longer than what we had hoped for a number of reasons. But our goal is that from the beginning to the end, it would take about 6 weeks.
6 weeks. That's a sweet spot.
That is the sweet spot.
So, interviews can be a stressful time, but placing myself into a pre-med shoes, I can't possibly imagine a time that's scarier than the weeks following interviews while you're waiting for the big news, right? So, in that situation, it seems to me that there's only, three outcomes: admitted, waitlisted, or, sadly enough, being denied, right? So, Jason Tursky, what advice do you have for applicants out there who may not achieve that desired outcome for admission? What do you think is the best way to kind of rebound from that situation?
Okay, sure. First, I think it's just time is to take a bit of time just to be disappointed and be discouraged. That is a natural response to this.
Absolutely.
And then you just need to get to the point where you shake it off and just step back and take a look at the strengths and the weaknesses of your application. And I think candidates have to really be honest with themselves. And if they're interested in reapplying to schools, they need to craft a plan for strengthening their application and commit to it.
Mm-hmm.
We here at the UIW SOM, we have had many of our successful learners and graduates who were actually reapplicants, over 20%.
Really?
A candidate that is denied, they need to, was it their MCAT score? Was it their science GPA or cumulative GPA? if they're able to, maybe get some feedback from the school itself. That's sometimes difficult to do just because of the volume that schools are dealing with. But another suggestion is to consider expanding the list of schools that you want to apply to the second time around. Many times candidates will say, okay, you know what, I want to stay close to home. I'm only going to apply to in-state schools. And so I think limiting really the schools that you apply to is putting yourself at a disadvantage. And just giving yourself enough time to carry out your plan. So for instance, what I mean by that is, say you recognize that your MCAT score isn't as strong as you want it to be. You applied and you were denied admissions in February. So you've registered for the April MCAT. Will 2 months be sufficient to be able to do that preparation? I don't know. I can't answer that question for everyone. So, but those are the things that you have to ask yourself that, okay, I think the knee-jerk reaction is, oh, to hurry up and start applying to for the next cycle. But again, what's going to be different? How are you going to help yourself? How are you going to be more competitive? And just sticking with it.
Absolutely. I think you bring up a very unique and thoughtful idea, which is the development of that plan. You talked about it earlier, but the application cycle, for us is really long. From May to March, that's a plenty of time to set out a near year-long plan to really put in that time, especially for your example, studying for the MCAT again. So I really like that. So for our students out there that are waitlisted, can you speak to what happens in that situation?
Sure, and the wait list is a really important discussion to have. But before we go there, one thing that I do want to tell our listeners that I feel strongly about is that the reality of medical school and the admissions process is that we simply have more applicants, significantly more applicants than we do seats at various medical schools. But I hope that most candidates know that we strive to make this a fair process and that we're communicating with our applicant pool. We want to just enroll those students that we think, by the indicators in their application, that they're going to be successful. We do not want to enroll any student to set them up for failure. There's just so much at stake. It's a tremendous amount of work, and it's significant debt that's accumulated. And so again, we want to enroll those students that, with the support of our faculty and staff, just really stand a reasonable chance to be successful in the program. So I'll get off of my soapbox and just go on to the discussion with the wait lists. And the wait list, in some ways, really being waitlisted can be almost as painful as being denied admissions, just because it's just a wait and see game. And the reason that schools have wait lists is because their committed students might change their mind and choose another school, so you have seats available. The problem with giving specifics about a waitlist strategy is that it's just unpredictable, and it can just vary from year to year. Here at the UIW SOM, we will keep our waitlist open until early July. But maybe if there's a few things that I could recommend to our waitlist candidates, it could be to send a letter of intent if you're waitlisted at your number one choice, basically saying if a seat is offered that you'd be happy to accept it. So now this is school specific. I'm talking about the UIW SOM. I know I've talked to colleagues at medical schools that prefer not to receive a letter of intent. I appreciate them. I appreciate them if they're sincere and if UIW SOM is the number one choice of a waitlisted candidate. I think a waitlisted candidate can prepare by reviewing matriculation requirements so that they know, if offered a seat, what they might have to do rather quickly. And that includes submitting a deposit. So there might be a short turnaround time to complete those requirements. So I think reviewing those ahead of time is important. my final recommendation is not to be that student
Oh, what
that's
student?
calling and
Mhm.
asking about where's my position on the wait list. Schools aren't going to tell you.
Right.
It's not that we're trying to be secretive. There's just so many variables, and it's really unfair um, to share information that's ever changing.
Absolutely. So it seems like you're saying the most important thing is to make sure you keep trying, not to stop evolving in your pre-med journey. Keep your application up to date. Keep us in the loop about what you're doing. Send us a letter of intent. I'm sorry, because we value them ultimately, and consider do what you have to do to be considered a strong candidate on reapplication.
And being honest with yourself,
Mhm.
um, and committing to improving your application if in fact you are a applicant.
Okay. So, Dean Satursky, I really want to thank you for being a part of the first ever episode of the UIW SOM Med School Mindset podcast. This has been huge. I think we definitely crossed a bridge here, of transparency and making sure that students have what they need to know how to make educated decisions about the med school process. Um, it's important to our viewers that they understand these processes, and the difference between admission and reapplication should never be, a lack of understanding of the process. So I want to thank you for allowing me to try and bridge that gap with our future students early on in the application process and their pre-med careers, wherever they may be in the process. So, and to our viewers, I want to invite you to ask us questions, via Instagram at UIWSOM, DM us your questions along with the hashtag MedMind, or in the comment section. We'll choose our favorites to answer, in each different episode. So I'm Tristan McCullum, and we'll catch you next time on Med School Mindset. Dean Satursky, is there anything that you'd like
Just
to
that
add?
this was a lot of fun, and I know you're going to be doing you're going to be recording more podcasts. Who are you going to have on for future
So,
sessions?
first and foremost, I would really like to have on the dean of the school.
Hmm.
Um,
Oh,
you
Dr.
know,
Pham will be great.
and Dr. Pham, he's
He'll
got a
offer
great
wonderful,
personality.
yeah. He'll offer wonderful advice.
Hmm. I definitely agree with you. And then, of course, the people that'll be taking care of students once they get here, someone from OSA, dean
Mhm.
of academics, um, maybe even another recruiter just to provide a different, perspective. But yeah, I've got big plans for the podcast, and hopefully we can have on some current learners to kind of give some
Yeah,
perspective.
absolutely, absolutely. You got to hear it from the
Hmm.
students themselves.
So we've got big plans.
Good.
All right.
You'll do great.
Thank you so much. It was a pleasure having you today. Once again, I'm Tristan McCullum, and we'll catch you next time on Med School Mindset.
Bye, folks.